Good morning, Mr. Livingstone. Will you take the oath? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Thank you. Good morning. You are Sir Iain Livingstone.
That's correct.
And I think you've given a statement to the inquiry and you've detailed your, what I would call your CV, your career and your appointments and the roles you've had. But just very briefly to recap, you were a police officer in Lothian and Borders Police at one time.
That's right.
And latterly you became Assistant Chief Constable of Crime and Operations. In December 2012, you were appointed as Deputy Chief Constable of Crime and Operational Support.
That's correct.
Thank you. And in May 2016, you became the Deputy Chief Constable Designate under a new Chief Constable at that time. And we've heard in this inquiry from Fiona Taylor. At one time, she was the Deputy Chief Constable Designate.
That's right.
So that was the role you had before Fiona Taylor would have.
That's correct.
And in September 2017, you assumed the duties and responsibilities of the Chief Constable of Police Scotland on an interim basis at that time.
That's correct.
And then you became Chief Constable in August 2018.
Correct.
And you remained in that position until you retired in August of last year.
That's right.
And you had served 31 years within police.
Just slightly over, that's right.
So originally in a legacy force, but latterly within Police Scotland after it became Police Scotland in
Yes.
April 2013. And am I correct in saying that you now have a new job? You didn't take retirement for very long. Could you tell us a little about that?
I retired in the August, and a matter of weeks thereafter, in October, I was asked to take on the role of Officer and Overall Command of a series of investigations and reviews that relate to the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It had been extant for about 6 years, but it still had a period to run. The person that had been in charge of that had moved to a new role, in fact, as the Chief Constable in the PSNI, and I was asked to take on that role, which I did, and I've been more or less fully immersed in that since October of last year, and you know, in fact, this week I've been in Ireland all of this week prior to today.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming.
No, thank you.
And just for those listening, PSNI is the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
That's correct.
Thank you. And before you left your role of Chief Constable of Police Scotland, you had actually been the core participant to this inquiry on behalf of Police Scotland.
Yes.
And that was really from the outset. And it was on your behalf that your senior counsel made submissions on the 11th of May 2022. Those were opening submissions. And that was the opening statement where you declared that Police Scotland would become an anti-racist organisation.
That was our ambition, yes.
That was your ambition. And then on the 23rd of June last year, again, your senior counsel made interim closing submissions, again on your behalf as Chief Constable and as core participant.
That's correct.
Now, I think in your inquiry statement, which I will come to in paragraph 1, you say you remain committed to the terms of those submissions.
Yes, that's correct.
And then this year, the inquiry were in touch with you, the inquiry team, and they sent you what we've come to know as a Rule 8 request, which is a written request to answer some questions. And that was, well, let's have that on the screen. It's SBPI 00595. And I won't be going through this in detail. And that's from the 11th of April 2024, and that's when the inquiry asked you for a written statement. And you'll know, and you have in front of you a blue folder, and there should be a hard copy of that Rule 8 request in there for you. And in addition, your response to that, which is SBPI 00596.
That's right.
And you'll see that on the screen. That's the response to the Rule 8 request by Sir Iain Livingstone, QPM. And you should have that hard copy in your folder.
I do, thank you.
So as we go through your evidence today, I will ask you to refer to certain things, and we'll have paragraphs of your statement or maybe other documents on the screen. And you're very welcome to just follow me on the screen. However, if you prefer to look at your statement in hard copy, you have one available. If there's anything else that you think we should have that would help you give your evidence today, then please simply tell me. If I don't have it on the playlist and it can't be all shown on the screen immediately, we'll get it at the next break.
Thank you.
Can I ask you to look at your statement? So let's go to the final page. Now, the copy we have on the screen has your signature redacted, although your hard copy will probably show your signature.
Yes.
And it's correct to say you signed this on the 15th of May this year.
Yes.
And if we look at the paragraph at it's at the very top of the screen as we look at it, it says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And when you signed the statement, you understood that was the position.
Yes.
Thank you. And can we look at the final paragraph of your statement, final paragraph 21? And you say, as outlined above, training is one of the 4 key elements of the Policing Together strategy. And we will come on to that. We've heard something about the Policing Together strategy from Fiona Taylor.
Yep.
But you say, in closing this statement, I wish to reiterate my personal deep condolences to the family and loved ones of Sheku Bayo, and my admiration and respect for the dignity they have demonstrated over the last 9 years. Now, I understand that with the permission of the Chair, you would like to say a few words to the family, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Well, please feel free to do so.
Thank you, Council. Again, I would just wish to confirm what I said in my statement, that my respect for Sheku's mother and the sisters and Adi and the family for the dignity you've shown, the courage that you've shown, and the commitment you've made to seeking truth, and it's one that I share with you. I've had the privilege to have met the family way back in 2015, shortly after Sheku's tragic death, and you've been constant and consistent in that dignity and in that resilience since that time. And I think it's right and proper that you as a family and Sheku as an individual are at the heart of this public inquiry, and it's something I support. And again, it's been a privilege to meet you at different times over the years, and I will do everything I can to support the work of this public inquiry.
Thank you very much, Sir Iain. I'd like to obviously ask you questions about a statement you made last year before you retired, and that was in relation to institutional racism. And this was a statement you made at a meeting of the Scottish Police Authority on the 25th of May last year. And I wondered if we could have that on the screen in front of us, SBPI 00460. And what I'd like to do is take you through some of the elements of this statement and then ask you some further questions. So if we look at the screen, it's quite small print, but I'll be reading it out, and we'll count the paragraph numbers as we go through. So the first paragraph says, Scotland's Chief Constable Sir Iain Livingstone, QPM, addressed the matter of institutional discrimination in policing at a meeting of the Scottish Police Authority Board today, and it's Thursday, 25th of May. And then the second paragraph is, his statement is in full below. And the first paragraph is, I have been the Chief Constable of Police Scotland for 6 of our 10 years and have been a police officer holding the office of Constable for over 30 years. As such, I have a deep and personal sense of duty and responsibility for leading, shaping and representing an institution of which all the people of Scotland should be hugely proud. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the first paragraph that I'd like to focus on is actually the fifth paragraph. And it starts institutional racism. Institutional racism, sexism, and institutional discrimination. Do you see that paragraph
I do,
there?
yes.
Have become iconic terms in the vital battle to tackle injustice. Police officers and staff, including police leaders, can be conflicted, both in acknowledging their existence and in using such terms, fearing it would unfairly condemn dedicated and honourable colleagues, or that it means no progress has been made since the 90s. Truly, I recognise and understand that conflict. I have experienced that conflict myself over a number of years. And if I can pause there, first of all,
Yes.
I wonder if you can help the Chair understand what you're saying here regarding conflict and your experience of it over a number of years.
I think the essence that I'm getting at is how the phrase institutional racism or institutional discrimination, as I say in my statement to the police authority, had become iconic, but it had also become controversial, and there was a feeling within policing, but often beyond, where, in my judgment, what institutional racism meant was misrepresented, and it was misrepresented as being a condemnation of officers and staff as being racist. That actually, if you said an organisation was institutionally racist, that means that that organisation is full of racists. That's not what it means at all. But that sense of, if you declare it, you will be subject to those accusations, is something I think that made policing as a whole defensive around recognition of something that I think to be palpable and to be clear. And then the other matter that was part of the conflict, and we used to discuss this, I've been a senior police officer for many years, and as the Chief Constable in Association of Chief Police Officers as it was, and then now the National Police Chiefs Council across the United Kingdom, this matter was often subject to robust debate, and some of the resistance to the acknowledgement of institutional racism was often articulated with a feeling that to do so would suggest that there had been no progress since the early 90s. There'd been no progress since Stephen Lawrence's death in 1993 or the Macpherson report in 1999. And what we all know, what I know, is that that's not the case. Thankfully, and you know, it's something that we need to embrace and we need to recognise, policing has moved on enormously in those 30 years. The makeup of policing, the values of policing, the culture of policing is far different from what it was when I joined in the 1990s. And I'm an individual who I always respect the past, but I won't romanticise it. And believe me, policing, in terms of how it relates to its fellow citizens, how it treats its own officers and staff, even that phrase, there's no sense of a divide or second-class citizens between being a police officer or member of police staff. There's been a massive improvement in police culture and how the service relates to its communities, how it provides policing service, and also how it operates internally. So that progress has been hard-earned, and it has definitely has been achieved. However, more needs to be done. And I think that was the conflict, that there was a sense that if you do declare policing or you declare your own particular service to be institutionally racist, institutionally discriminatory, you'd be unfairly condemning your colleagues, because that's how it would be represented in the media, and that was how it was at times after I made my statement. But I knew that that would be the case. Nevertheless, it had to be said. And then secondly, there would be this suggestion or this inference that little progress had been made since 1993, where we all know enormous progress has been made, and that's a good thing. That's a good foundation. But our understanding of these issues is far greater now, and it was absolutely crucial, I think, that although progress had been made, more had to be done, and the starting point to that progress was an acknowledgement and recognition of institutional racism and institutional discrimination.
And although you acknowledge, first of all, progress has been achieved, I think in paragraph 4, which we can see at the top of the page, you said Police Scotland has grown into an organisation known to be compassionate, values-based and highly competent. It is well regarded nationally, extremely well regarded internationally, but I know it can improve and it must improve. And was that a recognition that although progress has been achieved, there must be continued endeavours to make further improvements and progress?
Absolutely, and that covers many areas. You know, but Police Scotland has to improve in many elements of the service it provides, but it has achieved enormous amounts in 10 years. I think that the nature of a national police service is that there is an awful lot of focus on challenges and issues within it, but on a comparative basis, whether it's to do with levels of public trust, whether it's to do with detection rates, whether it's to do with homicide investigation, whether it's to do with how we respond to major incidents and major international events, on an international comparative basis, I think policing in Scotland stands in high regard. But much more needs to be done. Similarly with our culture, similarly with our approach to equality, diversity and inclusion. Progress has been made. It's important to recognise that, but that should be a driver for further improvement and to make sure that the organisation becomes as good as it can be.
Thank you. And you've spoken of this conflict and you've explained your views on that. How long were you aware of this conflict between the definition of institutional racism and the way that was being perceived and the possible impact that would have on Police Scotland?
The issues around the murder of Stephen Lawrence, it's almost... I joined the police service in 1992 and Stephen was murdered in South London in 1993. And yes, it was within London, it was within the Metropolitan Police, but the impact of that murder, of the failed investigation and the, you know, the absolutely shocking revelations that came from the Macpherson inquiry were ones that reverberated across, you know, British police and UK policing for many, many years. That commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion was something that after the Macpherson report was certainly adopted, you know, with rigour within the legacy police services in Scotland. There was acceptance of institutional racism within the legacy forces at that time, and much progress had been made. So the Macpherson report and the challenges for policing, I think have been a constant. Where the challenge was as time passed, as years and decades passed, the question came back. Well, does your organisation remain institutionally racist? Is policing institutionally discriminatory? And this is where, as I said, I referred earlier to some discussions I was involved at a national level in Chiefs Council, where there were very varied views on that. And actually, as an organisation, when the birth of Police Scotland came into being, you know, we were looking to bring together these legacy organisations, massively intense programme of change, I think really unprecedented in Scottish public life, and yet at the same time maintain our ability to provide that level of service. And I've said a number of times in the early years of Police Scotland, we probably didn't spend enough time looking at our culture, you know, valuing our people, considering how we would structure ourselves as an organisation. So the debate and the discussion around institutional racism had not, if you like, remained high in the public eye or high within the agenda at that time when Police Scotland came into being. Now that, with hindsight, that's wrong. We should never have lost that level of focus. But then, as you know, nationally, internationally, we go back to the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement. You had other issues in terms of violence against women and girls, other issues in terms of equality and diversity, you had the Me Too movement. You know, these issues rightly started to become prominent again and were discussed within policing, discussed within the public sphere, and required us to again to look hard at ourselves and to look hard at the organisation and assess whether, you know, those institutional matters remained. And that's really, you know, where I was as we went into the 2020s, and Sheiku's death in 2015, you know, was very relevant to our experience within Scotland, and undoubtedly, you know, the initiation of the public inquiry brought focus to my thinking as well.
And so when you became Chief Constable in August 2018, you were then at the top of the service and were in a position to start directing change.
Yes.
As an individual. Can we look at your inquiry statement again, please, paragraphs 10 and 11? And 11. You say at 10, as Chief Constable and leader of the organisation, it was my decision to state that the Police Service of Scotland was institutionally discriminatory and institutionally racist. And you then go in 11, if we can move down, and you say at the very end of that paragraph, ultimately, the decision to make this statement was mine as Chief Constable, and I was solely accountable for it. And does that remain your position?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Could we look at paragraph 12, please? And there you're talking about the statement you made on the 25th of May 2023 was a statement of reality. Recognition that institutional racism and other forms of institutional discrimination exist within Police Scotland was a fundamental step forward towards being an inclusive service where equality and fairness are clearly evident for our officers, staff, and for all our fellow citizens who we serve. My professional experience has shown that people from different backgrounds or with different requirements do not always get the service from their police service that is their right. For similar reasons, our own officers and staff do not always have the experiences and support that they deserve as public servants. It is an institutional matter when an organisation does not have all the necessary policies, processes, practices and systems in place to ensure these things do not happen. Publicly acknowledging that these institutional issues exist was essential to ensuring public confidence and fairness. You've said earlier today that it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in the organisation is a racist. To admit as institutional racism does not mean everyone is racist or all the officers are racist.
It doesn't mean that at all.
Doesn't mean that at all.
It's separate from individuals. This is an institutional, structural matter.
But you would presumably agree that if an organisation is institutionally racist, that will perhaps create opportunities for individuals to act in a manner that amounts to discrimination, and we're obviously interested in racist discrimination. Would you agree with that?
I don't think it would be a causation matter like
No.
that. I think that policing is reflective of life. Police are the public and the public are the police. I think that's particularly true in Scotland, and that's a great virtue. But like any organisation, people will have discriminatory views. People will have values that are not consistent with the very clear stated values of the organisation that they're in. Racism or any form of discrimination, as manifested by an individual, would always be, you know, robustly and strongly condemned. And actually, that level of condemnation, you know, when that was done, that for some people thought, well, that was enough. If we see racist conduct on an individual, we take really, really robust steps to counter that. That shows that the organisation takes this matter seriously. I think that is important, but I don't think it's enough. What's also important is to look at these structural, institutional matters some of it inadvertent, just as the Macpherson definition it tells us. It could be thoughtlessness, and that could be in terms of internally, how we treat people of colour, how we treat women, officers, women, members of staff, and also how we deal and provide a policing service to the communities that hold us to account. So the individual conduct of discriminatory or racist conduct would never be condoned, would always be condemned, and actually very robustly so. But that's not enough in itself. I think it's also important to recognise some of these institutional matters and important to distinguish them.
If an organisation is institutionally racist, would you accept that if an individual expresses a racist view, for example, that organisation may not be as robust as it could be when it comes to condemning or preventing or minimising the expression of those racist views by an officer?
I'm not sure that is a logical conclusion, genuinely. As I say, actually, I think if anything, people could say we're not institutionally racist, and I'll tell you why we're not, because look how robust we take. Look how severely and firmly we respond to racism when it manifests itself. I think that you need to be robust in dealing with that, but actually this is something that's less overt. This is something that you need to look at actually the impact, and some of those impacts are not always clear or not always obvious.
So do you consider that an institution being institutionally racist, or an organisation being institutionally racist, can be completely separate from individual acts of racism by an officer?
I think they're two different issues. I think they're two different issues. Both of them require robust measures. Both of them require acknowledgement. Both of them need an institutional and a force-wide, a leadership response to that. But we are talking about, in my judgment, we are talking about different issues.
All right. And do you consider there's any opportunity for an organisation that is institutionally racist to, by its very nature, its processes, its procedures, to empower someone who has and holds racist views to act?
Potentially, yes, potentially. I think that is the potential. But again, what I would say, and I say this in my statement, I don't think that's unique to policing.
No.
I think, I've been in different organisations, I think that's something that it's by definition, a lot of those institutional challenges are not clear to you. You have to really look hard at that mirror, and it can be uncomfortable. And I think what we've done within the Police Service of Scotland has been difficult, and internal and external. It's been a difficult message in terms of institutional racism and institutional discrimination for people to recognise or for people to accept. But it's absolutely the right thing to do. It gives us a foundation to go and address some of those issues that are difficult to do. But I do think policing doesn't exist in a bubble. We're reflective of other institutions, reflective of Scottish society as a whole.
And in relation to having made the statement about institutional racism and wanting to make improvements and no doubt carefully analyse the policies and procedures and structures that are in place within Police Scotland, is the hope that that will then either ultimately completely eliminate opportunities for individual acts of racism, or to diminish and reduce and discourage any individual acts of racism within that organisation?
I think it would increase how clear the absolute intolerance around any level of discriminatory conduct, behaviour, language, attitude would be. But actually, I think it would be even more important than that. It would also make sure that some of the unforeseen consequences, whether it's on recruitment, whether it's on training, whether it's on career opportunities that exist internally, and then also about how we are able to go and deal with increasingly diverse communities that we serve. So I think it would further enhance the rigour of how utterly unacceptable racist or discriminatory conduct is. I think it would further strengthen that, but actually it would also make enormous improvements in some of these other areas that are perhaps more insidious and less overt.
Right. And that is
So,
from a...
sorry to interrupt. I wonder, Sir Iain, and I do apologise for not giving you your rank when I bid you good morning. In relation to this issue of the concept of institutional organisation and its organisational sense and individual behaviour of racism, perhaps you could have paragraph 9 up on the screen, which contains the definition of institutional racism by Sir William Macpherson. Now, it's quite a dense definition, but if you read it short, institutional racism, and then you go, if you hold the concept of institutional racism and go to line 3, where it says it can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behaviour. So if we concentrate on behaviour, behaviour which amounts to discrimination through, and then there's a number of individual concepts which include racist stereotyping, which disadvantage minority ethnic people. So if one concentrates on institutional racism being seen or detected in behaviour, which includes racist stereotyping, would you agree that that's driving the concept down to the individual?
I think that yes, is the brief answer. I think that shows that these institutional matters can manifest themselves in how individual officers or how individual members of staff respond to an issue. But it may in part to do with the institution itself, the lack of training or poor training, lack of accountability, lack of follow through. So the behaviour of the individual through thoughtlessness or racist stereotyping that leads to disadvantage. Yes, that's the behaviour of an individual, but actually the organisation, the institution, the chief constable has to bear some of the responsibility for that stereotyping if we haven't trained our officers properly, if we haven't recruited them, if we haven't ensured that our policies and practice do everything to obviate such conduct. So it is related to the individual, but there's an organisational responsibility, I think, is what I'm trying to say, Chair.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. So in relation to the statement that Police Scotland are institutionally racist, that was then envisaged, as I understand what you've just said, that to allow changes to be made both externally, with where officers deal with members of the public or subjects or witnesses or any of that, but also internally in relation to things like recruitment, training, career opportunities. So it wasn't simply public facing, it was also looking internally at the structures in place within Police Scotland.
Absolutely. I always saw the organisation as being inherently aligned to the community and being a community itself. And I often said if we can't treat each other with integrity, fairness and respect and dignity and display compassion at times of need and look after their well-being, what chance have we got to do that to our fellow citizens if that's our primary role? So the internal responsibility, and to me would be an enabler of a better quality service, and equally it would ensure that the organisation was improving, and as I reiterate, the service we were there to provide to the members of the public improved.
Thank you. And let's keep paragraph 9 of your statement on the screen. Here you say the meaning of institutional racism that I understand was provided by Sir William Macpherson in his report following the Stephen Lawrence inquiry in 1999. Sir William Macpherson outlined institutional racism as being the collective failure of an organisation to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their colour, culture, or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behaviour which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, and racist stereotyping, which disadvantage minority ethnic people. It is against the meaning and explanation of institutional racism provided by Sir William Macpherson that any judgment of whether an organisation is institutionally racist should be made. And if I am correct in saying from your earlier evidence, was this the foundation of your understanding of institutional racism and the background to which you made your statement in last year?
Yes, it was. As I said at the outset, the death of Stephen Lawrence in 1993 and the report by Sir William Macpherson, certainly within policing, has been the foundation upon which, you know, a lot of the work that we've sought to progress on equality, diversity and inclusion has been built.
Thank you. Could we look at paragraph 12, please, of your inquiry statement? And this is on page 5 at paragraph 2, because this spans a number of pages. My professional experience has shown that people from different backgrounds or with different requirements do not always get the service from their police service that is their right. Now, I think that essentially is a direct quote from the statement you made last year about institutional racism.
Yes.
Is it correct to understand from what you've said that some people are entitled to a better service from police officers, but because of their race, you acknowledge that they're not getting that service?
Yes.
And what examples of that inadequate service were identified by you, or what caused concern that made you make that statement?
I think what captures that issue is this issue of treating everyone fairly, and you know, we treat everyone equally, and that's without fear or favour, and that's how, again, you know, in the 80s and 90s, that was the mantra of policing. And unfortunately, that has remained in some people's minds, that they think that is the right thing to do, where in actual fact, and it's clear and it's so important, you need to treat everybody according to their own individual needs, and that's challenging, because when you meet an individual, a fellow citizen, you know, you don't always understand all their characteristics. Some are seen, some are unseen. You don't always understand the challenges that they have, but that's the requirement of policing, is actually to treat an individual according to their own needs and depending on their own circumstances. So that can relate to some work that we may be taking over religious festivals. It might relate to activity or engagement events that are done in a way that's convenient potentially for the police, but actually are not in line with that particular community's values and calendar of events and other cultural issues that if the service is not aware of them, we're not tailoring our policing service to the needs of individuals. Well, to me, that's an institutional matter and is you know, must be addressed.
So is that a recognition that for officers who may be meeting someone for the first time, that there may be difficulties for officers in recognising, for example, a hidden disability.
Yes.
But there's an expectation that officers will quickly be able to adapt to that and should be in a position to provide a service to people. Even though they have a hidden disability, the officers will engage with that, they will recognise that, and they will adapt the way they deal with that person to accommodate that hidden disability, for example.
That's the expectation we have. And again, I have to say, that's a high expectation. Mm-hmm. When I was a Chief Constable, we as a society, I think we rightly demand an enormous amount of our police officers who are, on the streets, in the communities, day in, day out, in a way that's far greater than it was when I joined over 30 years ago. As I said, it was this without fear or favour, treat everyone the same, and we'll treat you the way we decide to treat you, and you'll accept what you're given. Now we accept our officers, everything from if they're dealing with an offender, somebody who potentially is involved in shoplifting in Princess Street today. Well, are they the victim of human trafficking? Are they subject to labour exploitation? Have they got neurodiversity issues that we're not aware of? Have they got dependency issues? Our officers and staff now, they think that way. They have these challenges. The truth is, when I was a young officer, they were a shoplifter. We take them, charge them, and we deal with them. Now, the justice issues still have to be dealt with, but there's much greater awareness amongst our officers and greater expectation. But it does, and it's a challenging and high bar that we set, and rightly so for the role that the police play in society and the unique powers that they have.
And so we've heard evidence in this hearing in relation to mental health issues, a mental health crisis. So now would there be an expectation that an officer who comes into contact with someone who's having a mental health crisis, that the officer would adapt the way that they respond and deal with that person, taking account of the mental health crisis that they're having?
Absolutely. I mean, the reality of it is that policing's at the forefront of dealing with mental health in the community. That's because of the absence of other provision of other services. So police officers and police staff are every day taken up with dealing with people within mental crisis. They're not often the best trained to deal with that, but in the absence of other agencies, in the absence of other state capability, that's what the police do. That's what they go to assist, and they try to, as best they can, deal with people who are in mental crisis. And awareness is given, and greater support is done for that. But it's daily business. It's an enormous challenge for policing that.
And you say there may not be the best trained, the officers. Is that something that you, before you left Police Scotland, that you planned to improve the training in relation to officers recognising someone who's having a mental health crisis?
It's all part of recognising vulnerability, of looking at individual needs, of being a compassionate and caring service, as well as there to uphold the law and enforce the law. But at the same time, again, it was an area where the needs of the Scottish public in terms of mental health were not being met by any other agency. And for me, I was trying to raise that as a national issue. My position before I retired was that until there was something in place, I wasn't going to step back from our attendance at that. A mental health incident, by definition, is unstable. Things could look stable at 2:10 in the afternoon. By 2:15, there could be crisis. People could be in danger. There could be vulnerability. So certainly, initially, we were trying to work with other agencies, with the ambulance service, with health professionals. It's an enormous issue of public, beyond policing, it's an enormous issue of public concern. But the police service and police officers, again, highly demanding role and high expectations on them to go and deal with them. And the vast majority of the time, they go and do a remarkable, remarkable job dealing with people in crisis and bringing safety and compassion to them.
And you describe police officers dealing with people in mental health crisis as their daily business.
Because in the absence of any other agency or capability.
We've spoken to Fiona Taylor about the very public announcement that was made down in the Met about police will no longer engage with that. But as far as you were concerned in Police Scotland, police will still be expected to engage with people in a mental health crisis.
That was my position,
Yeah.
and it was one that, again, I had conflict with. You know, I was really candid. You know, these are not absolute certainty. We're going to not do that. We're going to do this, because I did know that there's enormous demands on officers and staff. There's everything from, you know, new legislation that comes in that puts extra demands on policing. There's numerous examples of that. Growth in terms of public protection vulnerability, a growth in public policing, cybercrime. You know, the demands on policing grow and grow and grow, and there was a sense that actually we can't meet those because we're too engaged in dealing with mental health calls. That was, again, it was a debate that was held across the United Kingdom. I was more cautious. I didn't feel that we were in a position to make that step away, and it was based on the fact that I didn't have confidence in a mechanism that would ensure safety, but I also still felt that there was a moral and ethical duty for us as police officers to go to people in distress.
Thank you. Looking again at the paragraph on the screen, you say, for similar reasons, our own officers and staff do not always have the experiences and support that they deserve as public servants. And again, this appears to be a direct quote from your
Yes.
statement about institutional racism. And would it be correct to say that the experience that officers have, that they deserve a better experience as public servants? They're not receiving that. Not all of them are receiving that. Would that be correct to say that those factors can include race? That some of the reasons why their experience is not what they deserve is due to issues of discrimination, including race?
Absolutely.
And can you tell us if you were considering or thinking of any specific examples that you were aware of that fed into your ultimate decision to make a statement?
There was considerable feedback that we as an organisation had. Some of it captured by our own work, again through the work that you talked about that DCC Fiona Taylor led. We had a number of sessions with staff from particular characteristics, officers and staff, and it was very much an open session for them to share their experiences. Now, we had initiated this work, Fiona had initiated this work, and again, you know, Fiona's leadership in this area was exceptional and highly committed. Fiona had initiated this work prior to then Dame Eilish Angelini being commissioned to the government to go and look at the handling of complaints in Scotland. And that, again, was far-reaching. But in Eilish's work, as when she conducted it, she also held a number of focus groups or meetings, whatever they were described. And the feedback that she got, again, you know, was consistent with individuals saying that they, whether it was career opportunities, whether it was people not remaining in contact because they were returning from maternity leave, whether it was access to specialist roles and access to promotion, support and networks, whether there was a lack of empathy because of some domestic or family responsibility that an individual had that again might be related to a particular background or characteristics that they held. So there was quite a body of feedback and awareness that actually it was clear to us that, you know, very clear to us that officers and staff from minority groups were not getting the experiences and support that they deserved. So there was a number of what I would call information sources that made it very clear to me.
Thank you. Now, within your institutional racism statement, you expressed the view that Police Scotland were committed to regularly and actively challenging and changing our own policies and procedures to eradicate unwitting bias. And would that also include the other elements that are mentioned in the Sir William Macpherson definition: thoughtlessness, ignorance, and racial stereotyping?
Yes.
And what, at the time you were still Chief Constable, what were Police Scotland doing to regularly and actively challenge their own policies and procedures to eradicate this?
Well, that was an element of our overall overarching approach to equality, diversity and inclusion, which is captured within what for shorthand we were calling policing together. There was almost, as I said at the outset of the evidence, there's always been a lot of activity in this area in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion. There's been working groups, there's been focus groups, there's been a response to a particular review or incident. But at this time, you know, with a lot of discussions and reflections that I was having, particularly with Fiona Taylor, but with other senior colleagues as well, with other diversity staff associations, reflections on what was happening, as I said, across the UK and internationally for that matter, we strongly felt that we needed to have a coordinated, disciplined approach to making progress in this area. And that would include a review of, you know, standing operating procedures. It would include a review of our policies and practices. And that is an element of the work that we would seek to do to ensure constantly that our equality and human rights impact assessments were accurate, were valid, that maybe we've assessed that 3 years ago, but our knowledge and understanding is greater now. We need to go around that process again and make sure, with the experience that we've got, or with the knowledge that we've got, or with insight from some individual, either within the organisation or without, to make sure that bias is eliminated.
And was that seen as a continuous process, evolving?
Sorry. Yes, and it will. You know, I would hope that it's something that continues. To me, it's a constant need to update and to challenge and review.
Thank you. Can I go back to your statement on institutional racism, SPPI 00460? And I'll start with paragraph 8 of that. It's down, we'll have to come up a bit. And it starts with the phrase, the terminology. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And, the phrase, the terminology, however, can be and often is misinterpreted or misrepresented as unfair and personal critical assessments of police officers and police staff as individuals. That is not the case. Does institutional discrimination mean our police officers and police staff are racist and sexist? No, it absolutely does not. I have great confidence in the character and values of our people. I am proud of Police Scotland and I am proud of my colleagues, proud of my officers and staff. So I know, and I have shared the reservations and concerns about acknowledging that institutional racism exists in policing. However, it is right for me, the right thing for me to do as Chief Constable, to clearly state that institutional racism, sexism, misogyny and discrimination exist. Police Scotland is institutionally racist and discriminatory. Publicly acknowledging these institutional issues exist is essential to our absolute commitment to championing equality and becoming an anti-racist service. It is also critical to our determination to lead wider change in society. Prejudice and bad behaviour within policing, as highlighted by court and conduct cases, various independent reviews, and by listening to our own officers and staff over recent years, is rightly of great concern and is utterly condemned. And I'm interested in this final part of that chapter that I've read. Prejudice and bad behaviour within policing, as highlighted by court and conduct cases, various independent reviews, and by listening to our own officers and staff over recent years, is rightly of great concern and is utterly condemned. And I wonder if you can help the Chair understand what was behind that paragraph that you've put in there. You mention a lot of different aspects. Were these things that you took into account when you were considering making this statement?
Yes, I mean, I'm being categorical, and I've mentioned this, I think, already this morning, about that individual behaviour of racism or misogyny or anybody acting with any level of prejudice, you know, it's without qualification has to be condemned. And we've seen that, you know, we've seen that in conduct cases, we've seen that in the experience that officers and staff have had, that at times can come through employment tribunals, can come through civil processes, can come through a whole host of mechanisms and means. And we, I think, as a service, we're very robust on that. You know, we have at times been challenged through the court process in terms of judicial review and other processes, and we always felt, I always felt that, you know, we need to be true to our values and we need to support that. So there was a very robust determination, ultimately by the Lord Justice Clark, Dorian, where a group of what had been probationary officers were sharing wholly inappropriate material with each other. And that was challenged in terms of how Police Scotland were dealing with that, and on the basis of personal privacy and other matters. But our position was that is wholly unacceptable and must be condemned, and ultimately was supported by the court. So that was one example of that. Again, it's in the public domain, but there was a whole series of things, some of less profile than that, but a number of issues that had come to our concern that you know made it clear that the idea that prejudice and bad behaviour didn't exist is nonsense. It does exist, and we need to take robust steps to deal with it.
So this was a recognition by you that prejudice and bad behaviour, such as racist behaviour, did exist in Police Scotland, and there were individuals that had been subject to conduct cases, and we're obviously interested in racism, but criminal cases, and there were civil cases, including a judicial review, which we've heard some evidence about, where wholly inappropriate material was being shared. We've heard that was included racist material or racist comments being made. And that was a recognition by you that you were not suggesting that no examples of racism existed in Police Scotland.
Not at all. And again, it comes back to the discussion we had earlier that you know, an individual who acts in a racist, sexist, discriminatory manner has no place in policing, and there's a constant history of that being challenged, and again that must continue, just as you know it would be unacceptable in any organisation that had strong values and that had public service at its heart. So absolutely it existed. I think I was being categorical in the condemnation of prejudice and bad behaviour, because I think you know that level of condemnation goes hand in hand with recognition of some of these institutional matters, which, as I said earlier, I think is a different issue. There's obviously alignment, but I do think it's a different issue.
And your expectations in terms of, leaving aside for the moment aspects of criminal behaviour that may amount to criminality, what were your expectations in relation to conduct proceedings for these officers where they have demonstrated prejudice or bad behaviour?
Well, as the Chief Constable, and as you'll be aware, the disciplinary process, I delegate that through regulations, through 2014 regulations, to a Deputy Chief Constable, in this instance DCC Fiona Taylor. And thereafter, there's independent chairs are appointed from within policing, and there's a process that has to be determined. But it's very clear, I wanted, and I was very clear in terms of my standards and the expectations of conduct within the police service, that any level of discriminatory conduct, racism, misogyny was wholly unacceptable. Now, on any particular case, it would be a matter for that particular tribunal, it would be a matter for that particular chair. If there were mitigations, explanations, I don't know. But in general terms, I needed to be very clear that this was utterly condemned. And that example of people on WhatsApp groups or wherever sharing wholly inappropriate memes, just disgusting language and jokes, as far as I was concerned, they shouldn't have any place in policing.
We've heard evidence from Fiona Taylor about the 2014 regulations to do with conduct, and we understand that the responsibility for that is delegated effectively and appointed in terms of the regulations at the time it was to, not at the time of Mr. Bio's death, but from the point at which Fiona Taylor took on the role was 2018, and she was responsible for that side of things. So if I'm correct in understanding her evidence, you were not involved in individual decisions on that matter. That responsibility lay with Fiona Taylor.
It lay with Fiona Taylor and the system as regulated by the 2014 regulations.
Okay. And am I right in saying you obviously have said racism would be wholly unacceptable, utterly condemned? Would your expectations have been, I think you used the word robust earlier, what would your expectations have been in terms of the way the 2014 regulations were used and relied on by Police Scotland to deal with issues of racism by individual officers?
Well, as I said again in one of my earlier answers, as a generality, quite frankly, zero tolerance for any level of racist conduct, racist language. But as always, out of fairness, it's a fair process. That's what the regulations are there for, to look after the public interest, the interests of victims, the interests of complainers, but also the interests of officers who are subject to these processes. There may well be facts and circumstances that are presented, and how that matter is then disposed of has to be subject to the particular facts and circumstances of that case and the independence that the chair of that tribunal has. But as a generality, I was categorical in my condemnation of that type of behaviour.
Thank you. And
I'm sorry to interrupt again. Just going back to the discussion we had earlier, we were referring to Macpherson's definition and the concepts of unwitting prejudice and racist stereotyping. Now, if you find examples of these among your officers, is that a matter to be dealt with as misconduct?
Not necessarily, Chair. That's why there's a continuum from an overt racist, violent attack, assault, down to issues of microaggression, thoughtlessness, omission. Something that, as again I think I said in my statement, it might not necessarily be intent that lay behind that. So that again, our approach to police conduct, our approach to police behaviour and discipline goes right across that continuum. Some of it might be there's a training need, there's a management intervention, there's some mechanism taken, and then the conduct regulations would apply at the more serious end of that scale.
Thank you.
thank you. Would you accept that microaggressions could be examples of racist discrimination?
Yes.
And if what you said a moment ago about zero tolerance to racism, how does that sit with the idea that microaggressions are perhaps treated at a lesser or less serious level than the assault, the racist assault that you described at the upper level?
But because it's thoughtlessness. I suppose in legal terms it would be the mens rea. The individual might have manifested themselves because they came into a room and shook hands of three individuals and ignored the female police officer, or didn't speak to the black police officer and then sat down. And actually, you know, they may not have any intent to offend. They may not have any intent. I'm just speculating on that as an example. So that is an issue that you wouldn't necessarily deploy conduct regulations for, but you would equally want to take steps to do that, because it might have been thoughtlessness, it might have been inadvertence, but that lack of awareness is something, nevertheless, that we would seek to address.
If there is a microaggression, we've heard that they can cause harm and upset. Would you accept that also?
Absolutely.
And it may be that there was no intent or no conscious intent to harm or upset someone as a result of that. But in terms of taking a zero tolerance approach and trying to correct issues where they exist, why, can you explain why dealing with matters as conduct matters in terms of the regulations would not be possible whilst at the same time taking account of thoughtlessness?
It's the continuum I described, I think, to the Chair earlier, and the proportionality of deploying the conduct regulations. You know, and again, from Ailish's work and others, you know, there's been consistently encouragement to deal with issues almost immediately at the point of realisation. So if there's a poor behaviour, address it. Have the confidence to address it. Correct the officer or member of staff if it's a microaggression or some other manifestation. And then, again, depending on the particular facts and circumstances, it may well fall into a matter that needs a more formal process. But again, that would depend on the circumstances existing at the time. But right across that whole continuum, there needs to be action. There needs to be positive action. That's why I was encouraging us to be anti-racist. You know, that it's actually there's a proactive responsibility on the sergeant, on somebody's colleague. If somebody's done something, you say, look, you've just said something that really, you know, that's offended the individual. I didn't mean to do that. Well, you know, this is what you said. Oh, thanks for pointing that out. I'm sorry about that, and address it there at the time. That wouldn't necessarily be a matter of conduct. The proportionality of that, the necessity of that would fail. But the fact that you still not let it pass, if we can get the culture right, and that's what we're seeking to do by encouraging people to be proactive, by encouraging people to take ownership and leadership in this area, whatever position they have in the organisation.
So you say that's if we get the culture right. Was there an acceptance at the time you were Chief Constable that the culture was not right, that there were issues to do with people's confidence in raising perhaps microaggressions, in raising issues with perhaps more senior officers, that there was not that underlying base level of confidence, that if it was raised it would not impact on the individual who was subject to that behaviour?
I think it's the confidence to do the right thing as well. It's I think the use of your word confidence, I think, is right. I do think that. I think, you know, there wasn't enough investment in our first line supervisors, our sergeants, the people, the core individuals who would pull an individual up if they had misjudged something or they'd acted in a poor manner. And I've reflected on that. So I've said, I was, as you outlined at the beginning, I was a Deputy Chief Constable from 2012, so a matter of months even before the new organisation came into being. I was part of the senior team, and in the early years we undoubtedly spent a lot of time looking at consistency and conformity. It was policy. It was process. It was quite operationally focused, and we didn't. And it's a statement of fact. And I'm not pointing the finger at anyone else. I was a member of the senior team, but it was an enormously challenging transition and transformation that was ongoing, with many demands and a lot of public focus. But because of this focus on conformity, consistency, policy and practice, actually our people and our investment in training and our investment in developing a nurturing culture and developing an organisation that was reflective and was open had been overlooked. And that's something I recognised, and when I became chief right at the outset, it was something that I wanted to readdress. Everything from the well-being of our officers and staff to issues round about equality, diversity and inclusion. And that's part of the reason I sought to build the senior team I did, by bringing in people like Fiona Taylor and others.
And is the hope that if that work continues, that will improve the culture of Police Scotland and improve the confidence of individuals to raise the issues such as microaggressions, examples of exclusion?
Absolutely. And that again, there's the policing together work, but another major piece of work that we took forward, which was really challenging because we kicked this off during the pandemic when it was difficult to bring people together, was a series of work looking at leadership training and leadership behaviours, where equality, diversity, inclusion, the confidence to do the right thing, the fact that you would seek to collaborate with colleagues, you would seek answers. That programme on Your Leadership Matters is something, again, we started to develop in 2021, which again had come from our intention as a collective, my intention as a Chief Constable, to address that lack of investment in resource and priority that had happened in the early years of Police Scotland, so we could give people who are charged with these responsibilities of leading police officers and staff, who under the demands that I talked about earlier, under the expectations, the scrutiny, the oversight that very few public servants are subject to, giving them the empowering them with the skills and ability to go and do that, and saying to them it's okay to stop. When I would appoint new sergeants, I would say to them, now remember, I don't know, I'm not sure. What do you think? These are good leadership behaviours, so that there's a sense of collaboration, and although you're in a leadership role, you've got responsibility to listen and act with humility in that leadership role. So that's work in progress. It needed initiated, but it was there because it was there to address some of the issues you were suggesting, Council.
We've talked about zero tolerance. We've talked about thoughtlessness. And in terms of the 2014 regulations to do with conduct, who makes the initial decision that, for example, a microaggression was simply thoughtlessness?
It would be assessed within the professional standards department, right, and the matter went in there, and they if they've got an awareness about it, they would speak to either the supervisor or find some level of further information to make that assessment, and that's what it is. It's an assessment.
Right. So even at the level of microaggressions, your expectation would be that there would be a consideration and an assessment by the Professional Standards Department. And we've heard from Fiona Taylor that in terms of the regulations, those initial assessments, I think, were under Regulation 10, and they were carried out by the PSD. Is that correct?
Again, forgive me. I'm not as familiar in terms of the regulations, but I would just defer to that. It would be an assessment that's carried out under regulations. I'm not sure which one.
Right. But that would be your expectation. Yeah. Thank you. Can I move on and ask you, obviously you were Chief Constable in August 2018. You retired in August last year. And you've talked about an awareness of the conflict and the tensions that existed, and of specific examples of bad behaviour and discrimination. Why did you only make the announcement about institutional racism in last year on the 25th of May? Why not sooner?
I've been asked that question a number of times, and as an individual, and again, I welcome the opportunity to reflect upon that, the formality of the public inquiry. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and my understanding of what's meant by institutional racism and institutional discrimination, I think, had been greatly enhanced. Undoubtedly, the work of the inquiry had focused my mind and my thinking. We'd established a professional reference group of experts. We had, enormously experienced and talented counsel to advise us. And we were able to then, I suppose, to have a discussion within the service, of which I was part, around some of the matters we're discussing today, and a challenge to some of those issues of conflict I said about, well, the organisation's moved enormously far forward. Yes, it has, but actually there are still matters that need addressed at an institutional level. I'd also heard evidence of the experience of the Bio family. I'd heard evidence and had reports of evidence from police officers who had given evidence to this inquiry. I think very openly and reflectively about issues that perhaps could have been done better. And that issue about, treating people equally rather than according to their needs, when you hear or are aware of that approach still being taken, you realise actually, there is still an enormous amount of work to do. I was also influenced by other issues on discrimination, our approach to violence against women and girls, the treatment of women officers and staff within the service, and our inability to properly address discriminatory practice in terms of policies, in terms of support mechanisms. And for me, with that focus, I think that the inquiry brought, I felt it was the right time to do it. I also referred earlier to, this was an issue that was a very live issue across the United Kingdom. And again, as most people will be aware, Police Scotland's the second largest police service in the United Kingdom by quite a long way. Certainly has the largest geographic area and the diversity of communities, towns, villages, islands, etc. So that debate at a UK level, I was getting quite frustrated with, because there was resistance from some leaders in that side to make the statement that I made in May. So I felt it was the right time to do it. I did. The reason I spoke about the conflicts that was involved, because I held some of those almost resistant views, that saying, well, I'm not a racist, so why are you saying Police Scotland is institutionally racist? But that's a misunderstanding of what the term means, misunderstanding of what the challenges are. And I also felt that it was important for me as the Chief Constable, who in some ways had been a Chief Constable. I think even now, there have been 4 Chief Constables in Police Scotland. I think I've held office for more time than the other 3 combined. So I had been in that leadership role and had to take that personal responsibility for it, rather than whoever the successor was likely to be. So I felt it was my responsibility, it was my duty, it was the right thing to do, and I had to say it in a clear, unequivocal manner, because I was in that position in terms of my knowledge and in terms of my responsibilities to do that.
Thank you. I'd like to move on and ask you about another part of your statement, and if we could have that back on the screen, please. So this is SBPI 00460. Now it's, I think it's paragraph 28, so it's a little further down, and it starts earlier this year. This is obviously your statement you made in May of last year. And you'll see it says earlier this year. There we are. There we are. Earlier this year, I appointed a chief officer dedicated to providing the sustained and visible leadership required to coordinate and drive this essential work. Of course, our operational response to reports from women, from people with Black or Asian heritage, people who have disabilities, LGBTI citizens, anyone from a minority group is vital, crucial in maintaining confidence of all our communities. The confidence to come forward, the confidence to know you will be treated fairly, treated with respect and with assurance that Police Scotland will respond professionally and with compassion to your own particular circumstances, characteristics and need. And you've talked about that. And then if we can move further down the page to the paragraph beginning, injustice and discrimination. Do you see that? No, we had it on the screen. Injustice and discrimination are insidious wrongs with deep roots in history, and our work to address institutional discrimination will and must continue beyond me as Chief Constable, beyond any individual. Acknowledging institutional discrimination, acknowledging institutional racism will, I believe, act as a catalyst to drive and embed progress. The whole service must and will retain our resolve, our commitment and our focus. And I'd like now, if you can keep that in mind, to look at your statement again, please, and paragraph 20 of your inquiry statement, which is 596. And I'm interested in paragraph 20. And you talk about, I established, it's the second paragraph there, I established a dedicated chief officer role to be assigned to the Policing Together portfolio to drive the change. And it was inclusive to many officers and staff from diverse backgrounds in a way that had never previously existed. And then if we can look at paragraph 10, and it's page 5, paragraph 2. There we are, we have it on the screen. I appointed Assistant Chief Constable David Duncan, dedicated lead for Policing Together, to ensure importance of the changes we wish to make would be driven with visible and dedicated senior officer commitment. And so you said you essentially created a new role to lead in relation to this matter. And am I right in saying it was Assistant Chief Constable David Duncan who you appointed to take that dedicated lead role for Policing Together? Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think it's important, if I just, sorry,
Yes.
just to add to that, it's probably important to confirm that, you know, there was support from the Scottish Police Authority for that role, because obviously there would be a financial implication of an additional Assistant Chief Constable, but the authority was very supportive of the priority that I wish to give this.
We've heard evidence from a Professor Meir, and I'll summarise his evidence, but essentially that there is an issue when people in an organisation who have enthusiasm and passion to drive something forward, they leave, they retire, they move on to different roles, and the impetus can be lost. And I noticed in your institutional racism statement that you acknowledged that institutional discrimination would the work you do would be beyond you as a Chief Constable and beyond any individual. But we've heard in the hearings that you've retired, obviously, in August last year. Fiona Taylor, who's the DCC designate, retired earlier this year. And I understand ACC Duncan has left Police Scotland. And so it would appear that, to some extent, the three individuals who were at the forefront of this initiative and the statement that was made and the work that was being done have now left. And I wonder if you have a concern about the the absence of those key people and the loss of institutional memory, as it's been described to us?
The nature of policing, and I suppose organisations such as the policing, is that there is a turnover of leadership. I served for over 31 years. I'd spent 6 years as a chief constable. It was time for me and an individual and my family to move on, but I didn't retire thinking that everything I had wished to achieve or the progress I'd wished to make had been made. But what I did think, and I do think, is that we'd laid the foundations. I think that was part of the reason I made the statement that I did, the reason the creation of the Policing Together portfolio, and I was very reassured when the anniversary of my statement in May. I noticed that the current Chief Constable, Joe Farrow, spoke about this at a police authority meeting, that there was public sharing through social media and other networks, alluding to my statement and confirming that work would continue. And it is something that it is beyond any one individual. The teams that work within Policing Together, the officers, the staff are enormously talented and committed. And again, I think I recently saw in the public domain that promotions of a number of new Assistant Chief Constables, including Assistant Chief Constable Kat Payton, to take forward the Policing Together role. Again, another officer I've known for many, many years, has a fantastic record in terms of driving diversity and being a role model for senior women police officers. I think Katrina, as I understand it now, has the lead for Policing Together. So there is when a generation retires, there can be a slight gap in that transition, but more people will step forward and they'll bring fresh impetus and they'll bring fresh commitment to that. And I've certainly, in Katrina's role as the ACC for Policing Together, I've got great confidence in her integrity and her commitment.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time. Would that be?
We'll take a 20-minute break now. Ms Graham.
Thank you. Before the break, we were talking about the loss of institutional memory and the retirements of and ACC Duncan leaving. Can I ask you about another issue that's been raised? DCC Spears' statement probably sums up the situation. You won't have necessarily seen this,
No.
this statement before. It's SPPI 00624. It's actually a Rule 8 response. And I'm interested in paragraph 143. And I'll just read it out first of all, and then I'll ask you some questions. This talks about the Police Scotland Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy 22 to 26, outlines the Policing Together vision, strategic outcomes and commitments. In January 2023, ACC David Duncan was appointed as the lead for implementation of the strategy. In November 2023, Policing Together merged with the existing partnerships, preventions and community wellbeing, creating Policing Together partnerships and preventions. This brings together the internal and external aspects of Policing Together, streamlining the equality, diversity and inclusion business. On the 10th of June 2024, ACC Katrina Payton, who I think you mentioned before the break, will take on the role of Assistant Chief Constable leading in this space. It's the section that reads, in November 2023, Policing Together merged with the existing partnerships, preventions and community wellbeing, creating a new title. And so within a number of months after you retired, it would appear that the role, the lead role that you had sought funding for and appointed in terms of ACC Duncan had been merged with another role, and then only Duncan's role was only filled in June. So I think before the break you did talk about the gap, but it was this merging, the combining of roles. Do you see that as effectively a downgrading, where a job that was held by two officers, two senior officers, is now combined into one?
I would hope not. I mean, it is difficult for me to comment on the current structures within the Police Service of Scotland. You know, I was the Chief Constable, and I'm no longer the Chief Constable. There are extreme financial pressures on the police service, I think unfairly, candidly, given the fact that policing has already reformed and has put an awful lot of money back into the public purse. But again, you know, further savings need to be made. So one might imagine that there is pressure. As I said, there was the police authority supported a bespoke chief officer position for that, which I certainly felt was important. But the reasons behind the merging, I am totally unsighted upon. I would just genuinely, I'll just reiterate, you know, the quality and the energy that Katrina Payton will bring to the role. But I wasn't aware of the background to the merger of those two areas. But I would certainly hope that the focus on equality, diversity and inclusion and policing together, because I think it's a really coherent direction and one that needs a lot of energy and drive.
And at the time that you appointed ACC Duncan to take the lead on this matter before you retired, how many hours a week or hours a month did you anticipate him dedicating to leading on this issue?
I could say every hour of every day would be my expectation, but and I did have that expectation of senior colleagues. It's, you know, those that are privileged to hold a chief officer rank within the Police Service of Scotland is a, you know, I do expect for them to bring their whole personal self to that, as well as their professional commitment, and actually, because of the significance and importance, I would know that David, when he was in that role, would have given that level of commitment.
But that role has now been merged, so would you anticipate that that merger will result in fewer hours being spent?
Inevitably, if there's other responsibilities, but I suppose my reflection on it would be that, you know, a lot of the hard early work has been done. So the strategy's in place, the structures are in place. A lot of it now is to drive that into implementation, and you know, there's over 20,000 people within the Police Service of Scotland, officers and staff. So there's enormous resource will still be getting dedicated to it, and it may well be. I would probably not well placed in terms of detail to comment, but it may well be that there are opportunities of synergy or duplication or alignment within those other portfolios, and I don't think it will have been done lightly. There'll be a series of reasons to do it, but I personally see it, as I said earlier, and I'm personally reassured when I heard that Cap Payton was picking up the responsibility.
Thank you. I'd like to, we've touched on conduct issues and the 2014 regulations. I'd like to go back to that for a moment. If we could look at paragraph 3 of your inquiry statement. Sorry, that's 596. Oh, sorry, it's the very last paragraph of paragraph 3. There we are. Thank you. See the final paragraph. Staff surveys were conducted. That
Yes.
one. I'm interested in the last sentence. This allowed officers and staff to raise any concern in an anonymous manner, which would thereafter be subject to assessment by the Professional Standards Department. And you were talking here about an anonymous reporting line called Integrity Matters.
Right.
And was this one of the initiatives that Police Scotland introduced to allow people to, if perhaps they did not have the confidence to raise matters in person, they could raise them anonymously through this Integrity Matters
That's correct.
facility? And am I right in saying that, as you've said before the break, that a matter could be raised anonymously and that would then be subject to an assessment by the Professional Standards Department?
That's correct.
And that was your expectation of what would happen
Yes.
if a complaint was raised at that time?
Yeah. Could I maybe just add to that? It might
Yes,
be helpful,
please do.
councillors. On that point, and it was also on the issue around about microaggressions as well, the assessment that was made, what the professional standard would also do clearly, would look to see a pattern. So it might not just be one. If there was more than one instance, perhaps, of reporting, even if they were in relative terms, and I use it simply as shorthand, a low-level issue, but actually if there was a series of apparently low-level or other issues, well, that would also, you know, cause a level of further inquiry. So just to put that in context about different instances, I was just reflecting upon that at the break. Thank you.
So that was your expectation, that professional standards would not simply carry out an assessment of the individual circumstances, but they would also look more broadly to identify any potential patterns that
Yes.
emerged.
Yes.
And can I ask you about some evidence that we've heard from Fiona Taylor? Perhaps we could have a look at Craig Blackhall's statement, SBPI 0601. Now, I asked Fiona Taylor about this, a comment in this statement, and I'd like to ask you about it as well. So, Craig Blackhall, as I understand it, was superintendent of the Professional Standards Department between February 2014 and 2019. So he was superintendent of PSD during the period where Mr. Bio died and there was an investigation.
He was one of the superintendents. Yep, there was a number.
And if we could look at paragraph 44 of his inquiry statement. Thank you. And he says, in this case, I wasn't involved, but the Perk investigation would take primacy. This was at the point where Mr. Bio had died, and the Perk investigators had been appointed to carry out the investigation into the events at Hayfield Road.
That's right.
So the Perk investigation would take primacy. The assessment of any possible misconduct wouldn't have been considered until the outcome of the investigation, that's the Perk investigation, because Police Scotland wasn't conducting the investigation. Do you see that?
Yes.
And I asked Fiona Taylor about this inquiry statement that Superintendent Blackhall had given. And I said, certainly on the face of it, it does look like Superintendent Blackhall was saying that an assessment of any possible misconduct would not have been considered until the outcome of the Perk investigation. And she agreed. And I asked her if that remained the position in 2018 when she took over the role of DCC designate in terms of the 2014 regulations. And she said she thought that was still the case. She believed that was the case. Okay. I'm interested if this met your expectations in terms of the regulations and the, as you've described before, the robust approach to conduct matters, that as soon as there was a Perk investigation and Perk were appointed, that there would be no consideration of possible misconduct on the part of the officers under the 2014 regs by PSD.
Well, in terms of first principles, when there's a criminal investigation, that always takes primacy. And we, as a service, not only the conduct of individual officers, but as I saw, we as a service were also subject to that investigation. I had experience of that as Chief Constable, where there is corporate responsibility, whether it's the potential around it could be anything, a statutory offence, or certainly anything potentially even under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So the individual officers' conduct was clearly being subject to independent criminal investigation by the Perk under the direction of the Crown. But I always had a view that potentially would and might include Police Scotland, and therefore would include the Office of Chief Constable in that. So I don't think it would have been possible, is my view, for us to have been carrying out an investigation if we ourselves were being subject to that investigation.
Well, I think the conduct regulations specifically relate to individual conduct rather than Police Scotland as a corporate entity. Yeah. But in terms of this, are you saying that, in fact, that's consistent with your expectation that if there is a Perk investigation going on, that's a criminal matter, and there would be no consideration of possible misconduct of the individuals in terms of the regulations?
That is my understanding of the practice. But again, as I said, in law, I don't have responsibility for that process, so you must forgive me, but that would be my understanding, that a criminal investigation of this magnitude, where it's independent, takes primacy. We were not generating statements, we were not carrying out inquiry, because that wouldn't have been appropriate. So it would have been very difficult to make any assessment.
And can you explain what it says here? The comment at the end, because Police Scotland wasn't conducting the investigation. That would suggest that perhaps the position would be different if Police Scotland was conducting the investigation. So if Police Scotland are carrying out a criminal investigation, was the position different? Would you still expect there to be regulations, assessment under the regulations, or not?
Well, if Police Scotland were carrying out a criminal investigation, that would always be at the instance and under the direction of the Crown. And again, as I said earlier, in terms of first principles, that would always take primacy over any assessment. And until those matters were resolved, either there was proceedings or there was an intimation that there were going to be no proceedings, the conduct process, in my understanding, would be held in abeyance pending the criminality being resolved.
So your expectation would be that regardless of whether it was PERC doing the criminal investigation or the police doing the criminal investigation, that pending the outcome of that, there would be no assessment of possible misconduct?
Well, the assessment might be possible because the Police Scotland would have that knowledge, would have that awareness. They would be taking statements, they would have a picture of what happened. But the conduct process would be held until criminality was resolved.
Right. So you think there would be consideration, if Police Scotland were doing the investigation, although it's criminal, that there would still be consideration and an assessment may be carried out, but proceedings proper would be deferred pending the outcome of the criminal?
Yes, that
Right.
would be my expectation, I think.
Thank you. And is the reason for the distinction from your previous answer because if Police Scotland are conducting the investigation, they have sight of the evidence, whereas if PERC are conducting the investigation, Police Scotland don't necessarily have sight of that?
We wouldn't. And again, as I said, in instances such as this, the organisation itself could be potentially party to those criminal proceedings, and which has happened in the past, as we know.
Right. I'd like to ask you some more questions about access to documentation and evidence. But before I do that, you had mentioned before the break that you've obviously been aware of the evidence before the inquiry, you were a core participant and you were taking certain steps partly as a result of evidence that you became aware of that was led before the inquiry. We heard evidence in the inquiry in relation to, from a PC Geddes, who gave evidence on the 22nd and 24th of June in 2022, so a couple of years ago now. And he spoke about hearing a comment which was ISIS are staying in the station. And he was a custody officer at the time. He was in Kirkcaldy Police Office. He explained that another officer who'd come from Edinburgh was sitting and made this comment, ISIS staying in the station. But at that time, there was no one with links to a terrorist organisation called ISIS within Kirkcaldy Police Office. And in fact, if they had links to that organisation, they would have gone to Glasgow. They would not have been in Kirkcaldy. Now, you've talked about taking steps and the journey towards your statement last year. Were steps taken in relation to this issue about potentially a racist comment being made about ISIS staying in the station in connection with a custody in Kirkcaldy? Were steps taken in relation to conduct proceedings at that time?
I don't know the answer to that. It wouldn't have been within my, as I said, this would be a matter for the Deputy Chief Constable under the regulations.
All right, thank you. I'll come back to the issue of documentation. We've heard from Fiona Taylor that part of the difficulty for Police Scotland in relation to assessing matters in regard to conduct were that they'd never had sight of the PERC report because it was a Crown-led investigation by PERC. And we've heard from others that where it's a Crown-led investigation by PERC, that the report is in the ownership, if I can say, of the Crown.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts now, looking back, on whether it would benefit? We've heard that the position's different if it's a Chief Constable-led investigation. Would it be of any benefit to Police Scotland to have sight of the PERC report at a stage, as you would if it was a Chief Constable-led investigation by PERC? Do you think you would benefit from having sight of the PERC report at an earlier stage?
I think, and again, I don't know the circumstances of what was shared with PSD or not, but I think it would, because even in terms of efficiency, if the PIRC have carried out a thorough investigation, there's forensic evidence, there's specialist evidence, CCT's been captured and other evidential sources, and the Crown have determined independently that there is no criminality, well, that matter, rather than Police Scotland, if you like, having to start again and go and re-interview all the other witnesses and seek to pick up the productions and other materials, I think there's a logic to suggesting that would be it would help the process and probably be in the interest of justice.
And so once the matter of criminality had been resolved, it would certainly be more efficient and in the interest of justice, in your view, that the PIRC report be shared with Police Scotland?
I would think that. Again, I don't know actually what happened on that conduct process, whether the PIRC report was shared or not.
We've heard evidence that the PIRC report itself was not shared with Police Scotland by the Crown until a later stage, after the inquiry had started its work and made disclosure. You presumably, from what you've been saying, were you aware at any point of whether attempts had been made to approach the Crown to seek a copy of the PIRC report?
No.
No. Were you...
I very deliberately was, if you like, remaining independent of the process. I didn't have responsibility for conduct matters. I was involved in the consultation about whether the public inquiry was to be established or not, and again, at all times was if you like, allowing the process to take its course.
Can I move on to paragraph 6 of your inquiry statement, please? The part that says, I have never heard any comments. Here we are. I have never heard any comments of a racist nature made by officers in Police Scotland in my presence. However, I am aware of some instances of such comments being reported to and investigated by PSD. And I think you've mentioned that earlier today.
Yes.
Such matters would be addressed and investigated with the utmost priority and seriousness. And I think you've explained how that would be your expectation of PSD and the way that racist comments or racist matters would be dealt with by Police Scotland.
Yes.
Now, we've heard evidence from Fiona Taylor that since the death of Sheku Bayo, which is now over 9 years ago, that no conduct proceedings have been initiated or instigated against any of the officers who attended Hayfield Road and were involved with the incident with Mr. Bayo. Fiona Taylor's expectation, as I understand her evidence, and obviously it'll be a matter for the chair, is that it would be potentially considered after the conclusion of the inquiry, or, and I don't think she'd considered this possibility until she was here, until after the Crown review their position and consider matters again. Now, given that you've talked about matters being addressed and investigated with the utmost priority, and you've talked earlier about zero tolerance, and you've talked about the importance of the evidence you've heard from the inquiry, does this situation where officers who were involved in Hayfield Road in 2015 still have the issue of possible misconduct hanging over their heads over 9 years later? And there have been views expressed by a judge in the Court of Sessional Lord Ordinary that perhaps that is a considerable period of time for the officers. But also, we've heard the impact on the family, where matters have not been resolved, they've not been considered, they've not been assessed, and the family still have that uncertainty. Does this match your expectations of the Police Standards Department and what is being done under the 2014 regulations?
Well, I don't think it's to do with my expectations of police standards and the regulations. It's probably my frustration at this is the overarching process and system, and the delays that have been there. I absolutely agree in terms of resolution of matters for the family and for the officers involved, that 9 years is far too long. But I don't necessarily think that 9-year delay sits with the Professional Standards Department of Police Scotland. I think there's a multitude of factors. Now, whether the delay, and I think it's one that the Professional Standards Department, as I said, coming back to my earlier comments, have always probably assessed that there are other matters, there are other processes, and there are other forums that take priority over an assessment that they would make. So firstly would be the criminal investigation, and then the work that the PIRT gave to the Crown. There was then the review that the Crown were required to carry out, and then there was the initiation of the public inquiry. Now, prior to coming into the public inquiry, I wasn't aware of a lot of the information, a lot of the facts and circumstances that happened in May 2015, and nor should I be, because it was an independent inquiry. And as I said earlier, potentially as a Chief Constable, I was subject to that inquiry as matters may have progressed. So I do think that the delay is excessive and prejudicial potentially, and unsatisfactory for the family, for the officers involved, and for the wider public interest. But how to what the resolutions for those delays is, I'm not clear in my own mind how that could be unpicked. I think it would be possible to do it, but certainly at the moment, I think the Professional Standards Department I don't think there was anything other than good faith how they were acting, because they felt that there were other processes and other forums that had primacy over any assessment that they might carry out.
So, and I don't want you to get the impression I was criticising the Professional Standards Department in that sense, but can you see merit in changing the system to accommodate the concerns of the family and no doubt of the officers who may be subject to conduct proceedings?
I can, and the time issues round about conduct matters, I think, can be problematic. You know, I know, and I'm talking in the generality here, and forgive me again, I don't have the specific information, but for example, I know in regulations in England and Wales, there's a so-called fast-track process. This is sort of almost, I'm saying this in passing, my point being that there are mechanisms to try and speed up some of those processes. I think our mechanisms, our processes it's clear from the experience that we've had since 2015 that we don't have those mechanisms to maybe add a bit of speed into it. So I'm sure it would be able to be done, whether it's done in a concurrent manner, whether it's done, the work of the PIRT is aligned ultimately when it's concluded in a quicker manner, if there are to be no criminal proceedings. You know, all of those would be possibilities, but I'm sure that it would be, it's both necessary and possible for the conduct process to be quicker than it's been, I think I would conclude.
Do you have any thoughts about how appropriate it is for Police Scotland, through the DCC designate and the PSD department, to be considering conduct issues where the situation is potentially an Article 2 death, involving issues of race relating to a black man? So we're talking about that type of situation. Would there be some merit in a different body or a different organisation considering conduct issues in that situation? Could you see any merit in that?
I do, and I think it would require certainly a level of review, assessment. As we mentioned at the introduction, Council, I'm operating at the moment in another jurisdiction, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland, and certainly in the north of Ireland there's the Ombudsman's Office of Northern Ireland that would take on such matters, criminal and conduct, in regard to police officers, for some of the Article 2 responsibilities and that level of, I suppose, public independence. But all of those issues come with consequences. So resourcing, capability and capacity. You know, there is no doubt that the investigators in professional standards, their background, their knowledge, most of them have come from dealing as detectives and have come through highly trained, are very, very good investigators. There's a challenge at times if it's another agency who are going to maintain that standard. And then it becomes an issue of you can only recruit from retired police officers, which then can be a potential challenge as well. But there are other models in jurisdictions not that dissimilar to our own in terms of IOPC and the Ombudsman's Office. So I genuinely think it would be worth considering. But it will come with cost, consequence, and there's a multitude of factors to assess to get the optimum model.
Right, thank you. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 4 of your inquiry statement, and it's page 3 at paragraph 3. So that's the start of 4. Let's look onto this page. And I'd like to look at the paragraph that says, one example of improvement. Do you see that there on the screen?
Yes, thank you.
One example of improvement was the additional resources I allocated to PSD to ensure that complaints were coordinated nationally and to a consistently high standard by officers independent of the local or specialist team complained against. All matters relating to complaints are of course subject to oversight and review by both the PERC and the Scottish Police Authority. I'm interested in the final sentence that matters relating to complaints are subject to oversight and review by PERC and SPA. And I wonder if you can explain what you mean by oversight and review and how that applies with these bodies.
The PERC have a duty. So the PERC, prior to the 2012 Act and the creation of Police Scotland, the PERC's role was actually to review complaint handling, and they would take a view, and at times if they sense that the complaint had not been handled adequately or thoroughly, could refer that matter back to the Legacy Police Service and say do it again, and that continues. So as they have the investigation responsibility under the Act, but the responsibilities that they had prior to 2012 in terms of the review of complaints and the access a member of the public have would continued as well. So that's a unit again.
The complaints handling
Michelle,
part.
yes, that Ms MacLeod would be able to explain fully. And then the Scottish Police Authority, again under the, I think, I don't have it on my fingertips, and again forgive me for that, but under the 2012 Act also have a responsibility, you know, to monitor my responsibility, if you like, of ensuring that there are processes and systems in place. And the Scottish Police Authority discharged that by establishing a distinct and bespoke complaint subcommittee that it sits under and with the authority of the full authority. And that, again, is an intrusive meeting where the SPA can dip sample files, can obtain reports from the Professional Standards Department and the ACC, professionalism, the Deputy Chief Constable, and they take that responsibility and will look for patterns, will look for is there disproportionality, you know, is the department being properly resourced, are there concerns being raised about how complaints are handling either from members of the public or internally, are the Federation or other staff associations raising concerns. So that's the role that they both have, and you know, it's an active role.
Thank you. We've heard evidence that at one point there was a judicial review by former officers PC Payton and PC Nicole Short, and it went to a judicial review in front of Lord Woolman. We've heard evidence about this, and we've looked at his opinion with Fiona Taylor, and it would appear from that opinion, and Fiona Taylor accepted this, that I should say that the decision was from 2019. That in 22nd November 2018, the SPA wrote to ask the PERC whether it had found potential grounds of misconduct on the part of the officers. And so this was an approach against the background of the judicial review, where Peyton and Short were seeking to retire on medical grounds, that the SPA wrote to PERC to ask whether they'd found potential grounds of misconduct on the part of the officers, so that they could take that into account in their decision regarding medical retirement of the officers. And Lord Woolman noted in his opinion that the PERC gave this inquiry, as he put it, short shrift. And I think Fiona Taylor agreed PERC did not consider questions of misconduct to be part of their role, and so they simply declined. They said that's not part of our role to consider misconduct. And I just wonder how clear the roles are, where Police Scotland have issues that relate to officers and issues regarding retirement they wish to address. The SPA are involved with that. They're writing to PERC saying, have you found misconduct? PERC are saying, we don't have anything to do with misconduct. That's for Police Scotland. And there seems, it would appear at this stage at least, to be some confusion between what the roles of the individual organisations are. Were you aware of confusion that existed in relation to that?
I wasn't aware of any of what you've outlined. I would just reflect again about the different responsibilities, if you like, and then here's a JR comes in, and the authority, I think rightly, we're saying, well, actually there's a potential public interest to maintain the officers until these matters are resolved. And the alternate view, the one that was upheld, was actually the rights of the officers are such that that can't be prevented. But the different relationships and the assessment of it, I don't know how that would play into Lord Woolman's determination.
Thank you. Can I ask you about another matter? This is after the opinion of Lord Woolman. This is in May 2019. Can we look at page 3 of your statement, paragraph 4? And you say that in my experience, when a complaint was made, our Professional Standards Department acted with exceptional professionalism and integrity in a transparent and highly professional manner. Can I ask you about events after the judicial review, which you've explained you didn't know anything about, and ask you to look at a letter, PS 09552. And this was a letter addressed to you as Chief Constable, dated the 3rd of May 2019, and it related to a complaint in relation to PC Nicole Short and former PC Alan Payton. So it related, this is against the background of the judicial review. This is from Amar Anwar. We can confirm that we represent the family of the late Sheikh Bayo, and they mentioned the individuals who have instructed us to prepare the following complaint for your attention. You will no doubt be aware of the circumstances in which Mr. Bayo died. Today is the 4th anniversary of his death in police custody, and the matter is presently being considered by the Lord Advocate's Office on the basis of the victim's right to review after a 4-year investigation. And then it specifically mentions the opinion of Lord Woolman, the petition for judicial review, and gives a link to that opinion. I don't need to go into the content or the detailing of this, but can you remember now what happened to this complaint?
I don't recall, but I know that the process that we have, because of what I explained earlier, of the responsibility of the Deputy Chief Constable under the regulations, whenever correspondence came in, which was regular, whether it was addressed to the Chief Constable or not, my office had a set process for immediate referral into professional standards, either through the office of the Deputy Chief Constable or directly into them. So matters such as this coming in, it's headed up complaint. It would be fed in, if you like, into professional standards as soon as possible. I don't recall, first, you know, when I see the letter in front of me, I don't recall reading it. It may well be because of the profile of the case. I would have been aware of the anniversary that, you know, Mr. Anwar's written a letter of complaint in, and the matter will be dealt with, and that would have been my awareness. But I candidly, and again, forgive me, you know, 5 years on, I don't recall it. I don't recall that. But my expectation would have been that this letter would have been, you know, referred into professional standards and would have been dealt with, I hope, with a degree of priority, given the significance of Sheikh's death.
Thank you. And you'll see at the top of the page there, the matter is presently being considered by the Lord Advocate's Office on the basis of the victim's right of review after a 4-year investigation. Now, the victim's right of review is not part of the terms of reference of this inquiry, so I'm not asking you anything about that, okay, or any of your knowledge about that, but just saying that to give you that context that was ongoing, it was presently being considered. Do you have any recollection of speaking to the Lord Advocate about this complaint against that background, or being asked to defer consideration of the complaint until a later time?
I have no recollection of speaking. Who was it?
All right.
Was it Mr. Wolfe at the time?
Yes,
yeah.
We've heard that it was James Wolfe.
No, I don't. Right. Don't recall any conversation with James Wolfe.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to another document, please, if I may. It's SBPI 00643. And this is an interim report of the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion and Human Rights Independent Review Group, the IRG. And it's a report that was given to the SPA in May of 23. It was given to them 23rd of May. So this was a matter that was being dealt with by the SPA at the same time as you made your statement regarding institutional racism.
Yes.
And we've heard from Fiona Taylor about the independent review group, the IRG. So we have some awareness of that group. And I'd like to ask you that, first of all, paragraph 5.11 of this document. And I'll read this out and then I'll ask you some questions. Either way, PSD was seen as critical in setting the tone and concern was raised about how consistent it was in addressing EDIHR issues. And I understand, would that mean equality, diversity and inclusion HR issues?
And human rights?
Human rights.
Equality,
yeah.
It could be either, but I would think it would be human rights.
It was suggested that the department needed a deeper knowledge of equality, diversity, inclusion and human rights issues and how they manifest or are breached in workplace settings. There was also a view that PSD were more prepared to act where there were breaches involving an element of criminality, but less prepared to address issues of misconduct involving aspects of discrimination related to protected characteristics. And I wonder if you have any comment on this. This is obviously in May of last year, when you were Chief Constable. You're giving your statement about institutional racism. And it would appear that the IRG are saying that PSD are less prepared to act regarding issues of misconduct involving aspects of discrimination, which would include issues of race, which is obviously our focus.
Yep.
Is that something that you were aware of, that there was a less prepared, less willing to deal with these issues?
Well, I think it's the view within this report from the IRG. So again, I wasn't cited on what lay behind that view. I wasn't cited on what evidence they took or steps they took to determine that. But nevertheless, if that was their view and their perception, it's something that would have concerned me, definitely.
Yes. And is that something that you would have wanted to see addressed
Absolutely.
if that was accepted?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've heard from Fiona Taylor that, in fact, further training has now been given to PSD in relation to matters regarding complaints about conduct. Obviously, we're talking about race,
Yeah.
racial discrimination. Was that something that you were aware of, that further training has been given?
I was aware that there were a number of steps being taken within PSD to improve their capability and to improve their skills. I touched upon one being, a centralisation of the investigations, so there was greater independence, and that there was, I suppose, the CPD days, you would call it in a way, continuous professional development, actually just to maintain the fact that professional standards were so important to public confidence, were so important to protecting the integrity of the organisation, that it was important that they themselves were trained. So I knew that Fiona was looking at training CPD for PSD, excuse the acronyms, but just she was looking to make sure the professional standards department continued to keep itself, keep its skills sharp.
Right. And we've certainly heard from Fiona Taylor that the IRG, or the Independent Review Group, was created to be independent and to look critically
Yes.
At matters, including matters within Police Scotland, such as the Professional Standards Department. Is that your understanding of the?
Yes, this is something that I'd Fiona, to her great credit, Fiona had spent some time within the Metropolitan Police, within the professionalism portfolio as well, and was a great advocate for independent scrutiny and oversight, and having that at times can be quite difficult messages to hear. Now, sometimes, there might be a perception that's an inaccurate one, but it doesn't matter. That's what the view is. That's what this independent group have determined, and therefore inviting that level of independence in, as we did with the IRG, again was a change in our almost traditional culture of looking to establish review groups or establish working groups, and maybe have some independent advisors, but it would still be almost police run. This was something that was given, to the IRG, and again, I credit Fiona for doing that, and it brought that level of independence and challenge that you're outlining just now.
And this, we've heard, was their first interim report.
Yes, I think it was.
It
was an interim report. I think I genuinely think it was coincidental. It was on the same day. It was just in the business, if you like. This work was coming through the SPA at an appropriate time, and when I speak at a police authority, I give my report, and I decided that was the day I was going to say it.
And you mentioned the word, there might be some views it was inaccurate, but you've obviously explained this is an independent review group who've been set up to give their independent views. But is that, sorry, you were about to say? No,
I was just, I'm not actually specifically commenting on 511. I'm just saying, a group that's brought in, you have to take that's their view. And as a general principle, if you like, sometimes when you do that, there's an awful lot of learning, there's an awful lot of hard truth told, but sometimes for different reasons there are conclusions reached that are not valid, but then that's fine, we can deal with them, and that doesn't alter the value of the independent scrutiny.
I perhaps misunderstood the reference to inaccuracy, but is there a challenge in any event for individuals, and perhaps in this case, individuals working within PSD, professional standards, to accept the views of the independent review group where they are critical
Yes.
of the approach?
Yeah, I think that's what I alluded to earlier. That's the value of it. It can be I think anybody in their professional life, somebody come and ask an independent group to come and give you feedback, you know, you have to be prepared to take it. But that's a strength, I think, the fact that we did that.
And so you viewed that as a strength. Is this part of the process of making improvements in regard, particularly in relation to racial discrimination?
Yeah, definitely.
And could we go back, please, to look at paragraph 3.6? I should have come to that first. The IRG say the principal forms of data and evidence being gathered by the IRG include, and then they state, there's 5 bullet points there: internal policies, reviews, reports and administrative data produced by Police Scotland, external reports and reviews, including relevant HMICS thematic inspections and ongoing reviews conducted out with Scotland, interviews and discussions with a range of key personnel in senior managerial roles, specialist units and representatives of the diversity staff associations and the Scottish Police Federation, interviews and group discussions with officers and staff across a sample of 4 divisions, 3 geographic and 1 operational, and observations of the delivery of training courses. So there's quite a wide range of sources of information that the IRG appear to have had available to them.
Yes.
Was this part of how it was set up, that they would be in a position to seek out information from a number and a range of areas within and external to Police Scotland?
Yes, I mean, my understanding is that they were given sort of open access, if you like, as you know, subject to individual data, confidentiality matters, etc. But in terms of how Police Scotland was going about its work, that was the value of it. It would, you know, if it was limited in scope, we wouldn't have got the value of their independence.
Thank you. And can we move on to paragraph 4.6, please? And this is under the section of context and environment. We can just come down the page a little. There was a widespread view that while discriminatory attitudes were far from a thing of the past in Police Scotland, there had been a marked shift over the past decade. However, our interviews with both key interviewees and divisional staff revealed instances of ongoing discrimination against minoritised communities, including first-hand accounts of racism. And was this something of concern to you when you read it?
Absolutely.
And does that, the first line, first sentence, is that consistent with what you were saying earlier, that whilst discriminatory attitudes were far from a thing of the past, that perhaps there has been a marked shift? They've said over the past decade. You've talked about, from your perspective, a shift over the 30 years that you had in the police service.
It is consistent with that. I mean, I was given that time frame because I suppose that takes us back to the murder of Stephen Lawrence and the significance of the Macpherson meaning within policing. And again, it's similar to the fact that there has been progress, and that should be recognised, but there's still more to do. So I felt that was consistent with what I was saying and what I was speaking publicly about.
And at the time this report was sent to SPA, it would appear that the IRG had conducted interviews with key interviewees and divisional staff, and those had revealed instances of ongoing discrimination and accounts of racism at that time. Were you aware of the underlying evidence that the IRG had available, or was that something that was truly independent from even you?
It was independent from me, but again, it was consistent with the findings that Dame Eilish had from some of her focus groups. It was consistent, importantly, with a lot of the findings that we'd had from the focus groups and the feedback sessions that we'd asked for, where our senior team had sat with officers from minoritized communities using the IRG language, and asked them, well, what's your experience, officers and staff? How's it been? What are your concerns? And that was why we were putting such energy into the Policing Together work. A lot of that work had been initiated before Eilish came in and did her work, because that was a bespoke piece of work that the government had commissioned on complaints. But all of these elements, this was part of the awareness of the challenges and the issues that we need to take forward. And actually, that's why I saw the determination of institutional racism and institutional discrimination as being almost the foundation for that. You need to acknowledge it. Once you've acknowledged it, it allows you then to go forward and through the Policing Together work and other steps, start to address these concerns that the IRG reflected as well.
Thank you. And can we then now look at paragraph 4.7? Our interviews also suggest that those who do not experience everyday forms of discrimination equate this to an absence of occurrences of discrimination within the workplace. During the next phase of the review, we will seek to build as accurate a picture as possible of the current extent and prevalence of such experiences within the service. And I wonder if, reflecting on what's said there, and the comment in your own statement to the inquiry that we looked at earlier, where you don't see, or you didn't see when you were Chief Constable, examples of racism, do you think that could be an explanation that you're not experiencing it yourself as Chief Constable? One may say officers would be on their best behaviour if you were in the vicinity. Yep. But there does appear to be examples of discrimination in the workplace, i.e. in Police Scotland, despite the fact that someone in your position as Chief Constable would not necessarily see them.
Yeah, and I think I recognise it in my statement that, that I talked about earlier about these WhatsApp groups and whatnot. These were brought to my attention. Now, they would never, exactly as you suggested, Council, they would never manifest themselves openly in front of me. But the fact that there was this, the fact that you don't see it. I also think this relates, I think, as well to the experience that an individual has. So so that a woman officer may well know and have experienced all sorts of overt and indirect misogyny over their service, and have had to overcome them and deal with them in different ways, but they might not necessarily have observed racism, because it's what you see and what you experience. And that's why it was challenging for me. I think, again, I said in my statement, when you're a senior position, you don't necessarily see your organisation with that level of clarity, and you need to be challenging around that, and you need to be as honest with yourself as you can, and not be defensive. So I think when I made the statement about institutional racism and institutional discrimination, overwhelmingly there was support from officers and staff of colour, officers and staff who were women, gay officers and staff, because they had that experience that is referred to there, and some of the at times quite aggressive pushback and criticism that I received came from people who, again, as it says, didn't see it, didn't experience it, and therefore said that it didn't exist. So I actually thought, candidly, that what happened after I said my statement, it actually corroborated to an extent some of my concerns and why we needed to say it, and why we needed to make sure that we drive it forward and don't allow people to be in denial, and ask people to genuinely consider what we mean by institutional racism.
And given what you've said, would you place a high value on comments made by black officers to Lady Angelini in relation to her when she was conducting her review in 2020? She did a complaints against the police
Yes.
report, and the IRG, who've clearly say they've identified and spoken to people they've interviewed, key individuals. Would you place a value on the comments, the candid comments that have been made by those black officers about their daily experience or their experience of racism?
Yeah, I would, and I did. I mean, that's again, that was a significant factor, as I said in my statement, for me to listen to the experience of officers and staff and make sure that we did something about it.
Thank you. Can we move on to paragraph 5.2, please? This is early insight, governance and insight, I should say. There was an awareness gap. Sorry, I can't find it. I must be on the wrong paragraph. But luckily, it is almost time for a short break. Oh, yes, it is there. I'm just not seeing it. Yes, 5.2, our overall impression is that there is a clear understanding of and belief in the Executive's commitment to the EDI-HR agenda. However, we have also been left with a strong impression of an awareness gap between those responsible for oversight and leadership and the reality on the ground. In particular, the ownership of the agenda at middle management level, which they define as Sergeant, Inspector and Chief Inspector. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that comment, about this, the existence of this middle management level and the existence of an awareness gap.
Yeah, we're talking in this instance around about quality, diversity and inclusion, but it's a phenomena that does exist when, if you're seeking to change, you're seeking to introduce a particular working practice, even at a more tactical level, or you're seeking to make a level of transition. We saw this even with the creation of the single police service. There can be resistance from people who are familiar with the system, who are people who are products of the system, and people who have now got, have been in the organisation for a long time. And therefore the responsibility as a Chief Constable, it's a leadership responsibility, is to close that gap. And part of the way we did this was through, I mentioned earlier, our Your Leadership Matters work, where we put the need for that leadership firmly at the heart of the curriculum that we introduced. There was, encouragement, messages from myself and other members of the senior team. There was explanatory material provided into this middle management level to try to ensure that they would address it. They would see the purpose, and they would see the significance of what I was saying and what the organisation was seeking to do. And it's often the case, because of generational change and demographics, that, as a more diverse workforce comes into the organisation, both in age and other characteristics, it can be less difficult to bring those people with you. And actually, sometimes what you really want to do is that, the Chief Constable and often the youngest officer actually share the same priorities, and collectively you then give some assistance, because these people have been in the organisation a long time, and as I've said earlier, we potentially wrongly, but potentially perceive that I was criticising them. So that gap is one that exists. The leadership responsibility is to take the organisation where it needs to get, even if at times some of those people within it don't want to get there. The leadership responsibility is to take that middle management level, support them, but make sure that we move the organisation forward. And that's where the leadership training and other elements that are fundamental to the Policing Together work would come into play.
Thank you very much. Could you give me a moment, please? Would that be an appropriate time?
We'll
to-
stop for lunch and sit at 2 o'clock.